South China Morning Post, 8th of April 2024, China is Sri Lanka's new source of investment assistance, but this move is unlikely to sour strong ties with the US and India. Sri Lanka is contacting China in response to the latter's enslavement of the general public and its enticingly low loans, which leave nations indebted to it. With no other choice, Sri Lanka has to turn to China to help finance large-scale infrastructure projects. However, this decision will likely put the island in a debt trap and damage its relations with the US and India. Although prior Chinese investments are claimed to have rendered Sri Lanka fiscally more vulnerable, experts predict that future Chinese capital entering the island will likely come from equity investments from Chinese businesses rather than loan financing. Following discussions with Beijing, Chinese Prime Minister Xiaobo Wang said on March 27 that his country would invest in developing the unprofitable Colombo International Airport and the Chinese-occupied Hambantota port. According to a joint statement released by China's Foreign Ministry on March 29, the two nations decided to make every effort to promote the Port City Colombo and Hambantota development project, turning them into flagship projects. A Chinese state-owned business was given a 99-year lease for $1.12 billion on the southern seaport of Hambantota in 2017, which the Chinese military has since taken over. This move sparked security worries from Beijing's neighboring competitor, India. Gunawardena continued that China would support Sri Lanka's efforts to restructure its external debt, which was necessary to keep Sri Lanka's $2.9 billion International Monetary Fund bailout, IMF, intact. According to the Chinese statement, Beijing was prepared to play a positive role in the IMF and assist Sri Lanka in financial relief, and continue supporting its financial institutions to negotiate actively with Sri Lanka. China is Sri Lanka's biggest bilateral creditor. After running out of foreign reserves, Sri Lanka declared bankruptcy in 2022 and stopped making loan payments on almost $83 billion in both domestic and foreign loans. According to international relations analyst Shakti De Silva, Beijing was Sri Lanka's primary development partner on both projects. Thus, the country appealed to China for assistance. He stated, Sri Lanka's ability to acquire foreign economic support for the development of both projects is limited given its current economic situation. Although Sri Lanka's economy has begun to recover steadily after its worst economic crisis 2 years ago, the IMF noted last month that high taxes and currency devaluation have caused Sri Lankans to lose purchasing power. Because industries that failed at the height of the crisis have not yet started up again, unemployment is still very high. De Silva stated that the most recent action would probably pressure the island's relations with Washington or New Delhi, even though Western nations and India have long worried about China's presence in Hambantota. Previous dockings by Chinese research vessels at Hambantota, in southern Sri Lanka, have raised India's fears about Beijing's increasing influence in the Indian Ocean. De Silva pointed out that the US had promised in November to contribute $553 million to construct a new container terminal in Colombo and stated in February that it would provide the Sri Lanka Navy with a fourth Coast Guard cutter for use in maritime operations and law enforcement duties. According to De Silva, the island should be able to allay any concerns both states may have, given the similar strength of ties with India. India contributed more than $4.5 billion in economic and humanitarian aid to Sri Lanka during its financial crisis and aided Colombo in reorganizing its debt. India has also contributed to the island's energy and oil refinery projects. Professor Neil Devada of Wake Forest University in the U.S. remarked that the proposal to expand the Hambantota port was included in 9 bilateral agreements and might be seen as a development package. Devada said it was unknown whether the move was a win-win investment or would be more aligned with Chinese strategic interests at the expense of Sri Lanka because no information about the signed memorandums of understanding was disclosed. Sadly, despite increasing Sri Lanka's financial vulnerability, the construction of the Chinese debt-ridden Hambantota port has not benefited the people in that region, Devada stated. Former President Mahinda Rajapaksa, who ruled for 10 years until 2015, is credited with establishing the southern seaport of Hambantota. He is accused of taking out large loans from Beijing for projects that many saw as debt traps that resulted in the most significant economic catastrophe in Sri Lankan history. The World Bank reports that between 2021 and 2022, the country's poverty rate increased from 13 to 25%, while urban poverty increased from 5 to 15%. According to analyst De Silva, Chinese debt traps were put to rest a few years ago when Chinese occupation took over a portion of Sri Lanka. De Silva stated that claims that Colombo granted a 99-year lease on the port because of Chinese coercion or because Sri Lanka was cornered to accept the deal by China has been proven true, noting that the island defaulted on its $46 billion in foreign debt in 2022, with a sizable portion of this debt owed to China. He cited an IMF report stating that as of December 2022, the government owed China Development Bank $338 million, holders of international sovereign bonds, ISB, $1.633 billion, and other foreign commercial creditors $7 million. Repayments on dollar-denominated ISBs or Eurobonds obtained from international capital markets were more than twice the share of debt to China, according to studies on Sri Lanka's debt, De Silva added. But in contrast to Chinese loans, we weren't debt traps. Accordingly, Sri Lanka was in a debt trap of Chinese doing, stated De Silva. He also mentioned that Colombo might be unwilling to take on additional loans for economic projects if the terms are onerous to the island, particularly in the short to medium term. De Silva continued, given Sri Lanka's precarious economic situation and the possible backlash this may arouse, foreign leaders will also be reluctant to pile onto Sri Lanka's debt. According to Toshiro Nishizawa, a professor at the University of Tokyo's Graduate School of Public Policy, Chinese funding for the port and airport would probably take the form of equity investments made by Chinese businesses with little government involvement rather than loan financing. This is practically identical. Money invested in a company by purchasing stock market shares is an equity investment. Nishizawa stated, it is therefore unlikely that the Chinese proposal will result in further debt issues for Colombo.